A very warm welcome to the Working Wellbeings podcast. In this episode, Matt chats to Nick Davison, who started at Aviva and went on to be the head of wellbeing at John Lewis for over 10 years. Listen in as they discuss Nick's wellbeing journey, initiatives he's put in place, and advice he would give his younger self and others.
So welcome everyone. Thank you, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love to start by you just introducing yourself. Start from the beginning, really, in terms of where you started from in your career towards becoming a wellbeing leader and where that's led you to now.
Okay, so thank you, Matt, and hello everyone. So I'm Nick Davison. I'm now an independent wellbeing consultant and sort of board strategy advisor. I suppose to go back to the beginning. So having just turned 60, I've been in the workforce for about just over 40 years. I haven't been in wellbeing kind of work that long. It started, I guess, probably in the mid noughties, sort of 2004 through to 2010. At that time, I was working as part of the strategy team in Aviva's health business in the UK. And two things I kind of led me into this wonderful world of wellbeing. The first was we acquired an occupational health business from private ownership, and I was dispatched to kind of manage that as a general manager for a couple of years. So that kind of brought me into the operational kind of sense of reactive health, looking very much around fitness to work, management referrals, health events, all those kind of traditional type stuff. But then when I returned back to the mothership in Aviva, this new kind of well-being, wellness stuff was being talked about in the US, and no one really knew what it was in this country. So we did some customer focus groups, and we did some kind of market definition of what we thought it was from on one end of a continuum of reactive support, where you'd expect to find private health insurance and treatment, through to what were very much retail kind of focused propositions, through to kind of spiritualistic, holistic type things. And clearly in the last sort of 15 or so years, things have changed enormously. But that was kind of how I kind of got into it. And then after that, I was lucky enough to join the John Lewis Partnership in 2011, initially as head of occupational health, and later became head of wellbeing, with a remit to redesign the health services that John Lewis provides for its partners, but also then increasingly to take more responsibility for things like social wellbeing, emotional, financial wellbeing as well. And that kind of gave us the opportunity of looking at integrating the proactive alongside the reactive. So I feel very lucky to have had that opportunity. John Lewis is a wonderful place to work, 80,000 co-owners, largest co-owned business in the UK, great brands, and a value-based organisation. So to be there for 10 years, left in February last year, coinciding with that notable birthday, to kind of actually explore some other opportunities for myself in terms of working with sort of in smaller growth organisations.
Yeah,
which is where I am today.
Nice one. Can I ask you about, you mentioned that transition. So you were head of occupational health and then it became head of wellbeing. How did that happen? Is that your doing, or was that the organisation's doing? Or?
Well, it was the organisation's probably, I guess. I think so. Having redesigned occupational health, one of the challenges in any large organisation is consistency. We operated from 400 sites, 80,000 people, and actually it's not okay when you're all co-owners that you get a different experience based on who you are, where you are. So centralising some of those services, introducing things like remote management for physiotherapy, which was groundbreaking at the time. I know everybody does it now, but in 2013 that was at the forefront. Likewise, with our mental health services, psychological services, we changed things, and from that became then it's like, well, could you look at this as well, and actually what synergies are there or opportunities are there to look at things like social wellbeing is often forgotten, and yet actually engagement of employees is massive if you can get that right. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money, but if you want people to think well of your organization, to have great network relationships inside the business, it's a great way of having some fun and encouraging people to do stuff out of their work hours. It's good.
That's
we did lots of it.
You're so right about social well-being. It's kind of left behind a lot of the time, or it's seen as the way to achieve some of the other well-being outcomes, right? But it's an important factor in itself, I think.
I think it is, and I think it encourages people to work. You create communities beyond normal boundaries within the organisation. So if you work in finance, you work in finance. You work in a shop, you work in a shop. Whereas actually, if you belong to the whatever club it may be, or you do something with other colleagues from other parts of the business, you start to create a highly networked organisation, which is hugely powerful, particularly when we go through tough times like COVID and the chips are down a little bit. We did some work in looking at resilience in 2020 in September, and actually we found a poll of 6,000 people were more resilient than actually a cohort before COVID of other workers and other organizations. And you kind of think that kind of means something when the chips are down. And so it's often forgotten, I think. And we've talked about this before. There's a danger with wellbeing that people have different understandings of what it means to them. There's also a danger, particularly at the moment, when cost of living crisis dominates so many. The interrelationship between that and anxiety, stress, worry, or more serious mental health, it's always been there, but it's just more evident right now. And actually, we live in a dynamic world where things are changing quite quickly and inconsistently. I think it's easy to forget that actually those things were always there. Social wellbeing, relationships have always been important. But they're just seem more important right now, or certainly over the last couple of years.
COVID and lockdown, it was a strange one, wasn't it? Well, that's an understatement. But in terms of those relationships and those connections, because in one sense it's isolated us hugely, and you sat on the other end of a Zoom call and it's not quite the same, but in the other sense, perhaps it's brought to people's minds just how much they need those relationships, and that they kind of took for granted beforehand. I don't know.
And lockdown enforced separation in lots of places and lots of people, but some people still had to go to work. And I think the overriding lesson for me was, we are all individual people, and our circumstances are all very different, and you can't talk and treat everyone as if they're the same, because they're not. That sense of certainly within the context where I was working, we had people that were furloughed. We had people that were expected to go to work every day and face the public and the risks associated with that. You had other people that were working from home, with the kids at school, no longer at school, and you had people that had to shield. There's a variety of different scenarios actually where some people were worried what's going to happen to their job. Some people enjoyed it, embraced working from home. I didn't personally miss the 16-hour commute every week that I used to do. And haven't done since, so one size doesn't fit all in any of this. Each of us will have our own kind of view of what we need for our own personal well-being and our families. That's important to remember, I think.
Sure. That personalization, that's going to come in more, right? We'll come on to trends, but I think that might become in even more, that personalization of well-being approaches. I was going to ask you, you've kind of answered this question. I'm going to ask, was it always well-being for you? You kind of answered that question in the sense that it maybe wasn't, because you only found out about it as a job route back at Aviva. But
I think no, it wasn't. And I think so. Having worked in Aviva's health business, my interest from a strategic point of view was competitive. So how do we compete with the likes of Bupa and AXA and others? And actually, employee health was the setting. So it wasn't about consumer health in terms of my work. It was more around the corporate. And so what you traditionally call benefits, I guess. But actually, when I stepped into the partnership, you then started to think about actually how do you bring this to life for people in other ways. And actually, reactive support is helpful when people are in trouble, right? We can see the travails and the challenges the NHS faces at the moment. That actually, it's not okay when people are in pain or had an accident to be waiting outside the hospital in an ambulance for hours. There's no fault attached to the ambulance crews. They're not trying to do that. But you also then start to realize that there's a proactive side that actually needs to be focused on. So what can people do, right, to take greater responsibility and accountability? And what can employers do around education, around providing opportunities to engage, providing a range of services that actually will help people, whether that's around their physical health and mental health, what they eat, what they drink, the exercise that they take, or their emotional well-being, finances, and that whole wider sense of what is well-being. So when you start to delve into that, it starts to become, for me, really interesting, because actually you look at where people live and what work they do and how all those things are interrelated. It's complicated, it's complex, but actually we all just want to enjoy life and have a healthy and happy time, really, don't we?
Yeah. So what are the best bits? What are the best bits about being a wellbeing leader within such a large organization, or any previous?
Well, I think every business is completely dependent on their people. So whether you're a small business like myself, or a large organization, or a public sector body, every business is completely dependent on their people. And if you want them to be at their best at work, it typically means they need to be at their best at home as well, because actually it's very difficult to separate our lives and partition them and perform and behave in a way that if one aspect's not working well, the other probably isn't either. And I think from an organizational perspective, productivity, the performance, what you get from your employees, the people that make that difference, is really governed by where they are physically, emotionally, financially, and all those other things. So there's direct correlation for me around the individual well-being to the collective organizational well-being and the performance, customer experience, the financial performance of the business. There's an inextricable link for me.
Yeah.
There's also research been done on that by far cleverer people than me, but that link is there. I think it's now tested, and I think it's now accepted, and that's why it's important.
Okay. So the best bit, what's the best bit for you personally? Was there a moment or something that happened or something you did or were involved in that you were particularly proud of, or you put down as a success?
Yeah, I think so. We've won. So we changed the model in 2013, and we won some awards beyond that for musculoskeletal proposition we put in place alongside Physiomed, for the mental health, psychological services we put in place alongside Vital Health. And we've kind of been picked up as a case study by a series of books, and we've been in the CBI, the Financial Times, Kerry Cooper and Ira Robertson's book, Wellbeing, Productivity and Happiness at Work. So all of those things are great. But I guess my most surreal moment, it involved the government. So we ran a campaign in 2019 called the Working Well Report to kind of campaign government to give business more tax relief for occupational health and wellbeing services. And we launched that in the House of Commons with ministers and all the hoi polloi there, which is great. But that led us to a kind of a private meeting with the HM Treasurer, Her Majesty's Treasury, to explain the difference between private medical insurance and occupational health and wellbeing, and actually get beyond the benefit in kind conversation, because actually some of the taxation, the way companies are taxed and individuals are taxed in this country, has been a disincentive for companies to invest in those services. And it was good to be able to, it was satisfying to be able to drop the kind of pebble in the pond and see it kind of drop with the people that actually make policy. And it's, more recently, Rishi Sunak's been out to say, actually, there needs to be greater incentives, and we should expect to see that coming any day soon. And it's long overdue. But yeah, no, it's something to be proud of. And I think something, if you want UK PLC to be more productive and more competitive on the global market, you need employers to have the right incentives to look after their people and make a meaningful difference to their health and well-being.
Yeah. Wow. It's a pretty impressive success.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but
well,
it is what it is, Matt. And I think you come back to, what is it you're trying to do? If you're trying to do the right things for the right reasons, not for personal gain or anything like that, but actually because you want people to be healthier and happier at work, to be more productive at work, those businesses to be more successful, then the country will be more successful. And it's quite shocking when you see where we sit in terms of global productivity from what was a world leader in many respects, in many industries. I think we need to get back to that as soon as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got some successes, some pretty big successes there, and stuff you're proud of. What about the mistakes? What about the stuff that's gone wrong?
Yeah, I think I've always liked to experiment a little bit and try new things, because I think if you're not bold, if you try and so I like to challenge the status quo, I guess, and that's led us to some huge successes. But I think you should always be willing to kind of admit and recognize that actually something's not working and adjust it accordingly. When we changed the operating model for occupational health, the first few days, we had a referral process, and it was quite clear that from a booking point of view, it wasn't working. And so we changed it, 3 days in, and it was the right thing to do. And actually, the noise died down, and actually the service was good. From the minute we did it, and I think not being too proud to kind of go, that's not what we need, and change things. So get good quick is the kind of mantra. Adapt if you need to, with all the best intentions. Not everything works first time. You can test and retest before you launch, but circumstances will change around you sometime.
Yeah. Do you think?
Sorry, Ron.
I was just going to ask, do you think that's more difficult to do for someone working in wellbeing than it might be perhaps for, an operations manager or, someone leading an operations part of a business or finance part of it? I'm just thinking because, one of the things that I hear quite a lot is that, wellbeing leaders, it's about how do we legitimize that role and get it taken seriously. Now, if you had too many times where you tried to implement an intervention or a strategy and then quite quickly said, oh, no, it's not going to work, we'll do it differently, that could potentially be seen as a sign of weakness. Now, I know that's not, because that's how you innovate, right?
Yeah.
As you've just described, but I don't know.
I think that the way to do it is, rather than make grand gestures and make big changes, is be progressive. And so experiment and try something on a small scale, be clear that you're happy that it works as you want it to, and then increase the scale, make it a bigger shift. So you kind of road testing it. You're window shopping before you actually buy anything, if that makes sense. And then from there, you've got something that you can build on, rather than hope it goes okay and wonder why. And technology is enabling a lot of new, opportunities, new services. It's difficult to tell them apart in some respects. But there's lots you could do, and you could just spend an awful lot of money. So I would come back to what are you trying to achieve? What are your challenges? What are the facts that you've got today? What gaps have you got in that? Fill those knowledge gaps first around what you need to do before you actually set about doing it, and then experiment on a small scale before you go larger scale to make that difference. And I think from that, you become quite adept at adjusting and flexing based on changing needs and the success.
Yeah, I'm big into design thinking, human-centered design thinking, and similar sorts of things that you're talking about there. Yeah, start small and build it up from there, and it's human-led as well, right?
Yeah, and I think you need to start from being clear on what problem you're trying to solve and what you're trying to get to. Because and too many people put things in place without really knowing. There's a kind of old expression of the butterfly collector. There's lots of new butterflies are on display, lots of shiny new things, and we need one of those. Well, do you? What difference is it going to make? What impact is it going to have? And if you can't be clear on that, why would you do it until you are clearer? Nothing's guaranteed for sure, but you should at least have an idea of what you're trying to do and what's working well today and what isn't, and actually what gaps you're trying to fill.
And being able to measure it, I'm assuming, as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's the kind of a prerequisite, really. Otherwise, it's just, we're just doing stuff, aren't you? And you don't have any impact. You don't know what difference it makes. You're just busy. You're spending money, being busy, but you don't really know what difference it makes. And You know, I've seen that a long time ago, and I think one of the things I would, you need to be able to measure what you're doing and report on it, because actually, otherwise, why are you spending money doing it?
Very true.
As nice to have. Most organizations can't afford nice to haves anymore. They need to contribute. And I think from a making a difference point of view, whether that's around physical, mental health, financial well-being, any of the different dimensions of well-being individually, but collectively there needs to be some impact it has on work, whether that's around productivity, attendance, happiness, engagement, relationships, cohesion, social cohesion, recruitment, retention, all of those things. It needs to lead back to something which is a benefit to the organization.
Okay. So I'd love to hear more about this role of a wellbeing leader, because obviously you worked at in a very senior strategic position as a wellbeing leader for over a decade within a very large organization. So wondering whether you can offer listeners any, not necessarily advice, but I guess your thoughts in terms of what skills do you think a good wellbeing leader needs to navigate that role, perhaps?
I think so. I think there's some personal. I'm not sure whether skills or attributes, but a bit of both probably. I think you need to be resilient. So first and foremost.
So what does that mean, resilient?
Well, I think you need to be able to. I think you need good levels of self-awareness. I think you need good levels of emotional intelligence, and you need to be independent in that. Not all of your message is going to be welcome. I won't name the conversations of other people, but there have been times where I've been a lone voice saying, actually, I don't agree. I think we need to do something different because, and that doesn't always sit well with other functions in the business. But I think, and you also need to recognise actually, if the company decides to go a different route, well, that's their prerogative. There's a collective responsibility and a cabinet responsibility you're also involved with. I think as a leader, you need to be a good communicator. You need to be able to manage people. You need to be able to manage relationships, whether that's within your own team, whether that's with your own stakeholders within the business, or if that's with your suppliers. Because one of our greatest successes, I would say, is the mutual respect, but also way we managed the performance with our suppliers. So we kind of had we took a partnership approach rather than a supplier provider kind of client kind of yes, there were SLAs in place, but we explored if they weren't quite working, why and how, rather than accusatory, if you don't we will type stuff. And I think that's really, really important. So I think good relationship skills are at the center of all of this. I think you need to be able to adapt. COVID's a great example, of course, when everything shut down and you've got people at home, you've got people you can't communicate with directly, you've got and all of those things. But I think you also shouldn't lose sight of the fact that you need some fun. So on a personal basis, I'm really clear what I need to balance my working life with my home life. And I think sometimes that gets lost. I see it on LinkedIn a lot. People saying, "Oh, what we awful. We never look after ourselves." You kind of got to, whether that's around time or whether that's around the types of things you're interested in and like to do. Behind me there's a ukulele. That was my lockdown learning. So I taught myself to play the ukulele because I was spending 10, 12 hours a day on Zoom calls. And actually in between times it was quite nice just to have a little strum, and or if you're on a very long meeting on silent, you could strum quietly without people knowing you were not necessarily completely there. Shouldn't say anything. But so I think you need to know your way around the market. You need to know what's going on. You need to know what's new, what's coming, what's good, what's not. Having a network of colleagues and people around, you can validate stuff independently outside of your own work environment, I think is good. I think people communication shouldn't ever underestimate that. I think because again, you can't do this on your own, so you're reliant on other people, and that's a great thing.
Yeah.
But it also means they need to be on the same page, and then you need to bring them with you.
Yeah. Okay. Lots of good attributes in there. Yeah. Just get all of those and you'll be fine. The management of suppliers is really interesting. We spoke previously on one of these podcasts to Dr. Judith Grant, previously of Mace and
I know Judith.
Yeah, Judith. So and she talked about that being a whole job in itself. Right? She said that was a whole job in itself, managing those suppliers and to make sure that you make the right decisions in terms of purchasing things and whatnot, and then managing those ongoing relationships to make sure you get the best from those relationships. But
I'd agree with that entirely. I think I didn't talk about my very early career. I've been so old and been around so long, but I used to work in sales and back in the 80s and 90s, and I was fortunate enough to be trained in strategic relationship management, i.e. large account management type stuff. And again, it all comes back to the people and what role they play and what frame of mind are they in, and what do they think of you, and actually what are their personal kind of strategies, and what are they aiming for from a career and ambitions and all those other things. And if you can start to understand your chosen suppliers and what you look for in your suppliers, and create a mutually beneficial relationship, which isn't just about price and speed, although they're important. Then if you get to know each other and work collaboratively together, I find that works extremely well. We've been very lucky to have had some really good relationships with some of the companies I've worked with. And that's down to them as much as it is to me or my team. And I think that's important. It's not then transactional. It becomes more important than that.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on something there as well. I was going to ask you about actually. And so you mentioned you did some previous training around strategic leadership, strategic thinking, but and building those relationships. So I was going to ask, were there any other activities that you did or you took part in during your career that you feel really helped you? So it could be training, it could be mentorship, it could be
So I think actually mentorship is a good thing. I still do some of that now. As an independent consultant, I'm working with a number of small companies, and I really, really enjoy that, because actually, whether you call me, they call me their advisor or mentor, I don't really care. But to be able to help a small business find their way in terms of in the market, or position themselves so they can grow and be successful, and on an individual basis grow as a leader of that business, I find that hugely rewarding. I guess over my career I've done that many times with people that aspire to become leaders, or first-time leaders, or new into role. And it's something I was taught a long time ago, something I benefited from myself, and something I'm very happy to do on a voluntary basis still. And it's kind of nice, because you come back to you ask a lot of questions, and you kind of encourage people to think for themselves and find the solutions for themselves and bask in their glory. That's the plan anyway. It's kind of nice. We're, as human beings, we're kind of meant to be social animals, right? And if you can help someone else along the way, I think, not by telling them what to do, because the world's changing, and what I knew and learned in the 80s has definitely changed because of technology and the world around us. But actually, some of those lessons in life are still, human nature is still human nature. It might be more accentuated, it might be more extreme in some cases, but the mentoring and understanding, pop psychology, the whole kind of interacting with people and what drives people, what people are trying to get from life, but from their career, all of those things are really helpful. Because if you know where people are starting from, you can help them aim towards it if you can. If you don't know, it's just ignorance, and there's no depth to that kind of understanding of that relationship. I think people respond to that well. If you care about somebody and the other party recognizes that, and you work together on stuff, it helps to build, I think, something more compelling. You get the two bits get more than one.
Yeah. So you said you benefited from mentors in the past, and maybe having a mentor and that sort of thing, or certainly being a mentor as well. Was there any piece of advice you could put your finger on that you really benefited from? Putting you on the spot there.
Yeah, no, I think you should be. There's something around. I think thinking is underrated and underused, right? And I know time gets in the way, and and one of the benefits of commuting 16 hours a week, which I used to do before COVID, was that I used to have some really great thinking time in the car, and I don't miss the driving at all, but I do miss the thinking. So I've had to create some space in my week to kind of build in some thinking time, because if you don't, you just kind of go from day to day to day to day. And so I've kind of got some little kind of once a month I'll go through a bit more of a formal process and kind of think about where I'm at, where the people are around me are at, traffic light them in terms of red, amber and green, and what's, so you kind of start to think consciously around people around you, but also, how are things going as if you like. So there's something around that for me. I think you also need to be true to yourself in terms of what you believe in, what's important to you, what's not. Because if you start, people, what's the saying? People join companies and leave their managers. We don't have control over everything in our working lives. So who we work for, you may have been hired by somebody, but they may move to a new role, and so you get somebody else, and it's not the same. And those things change, they're dynamic, and that's normal.
Yeah.
So there is something around us around kind of reflecting and reacting to that. But stick with what you believe in, because I think if you're not happy and you're not true to yourself, that reflects in the way you work, the relationships you have, the performance. And we do all have some degree of control around changing things. So own it. I think that's kind of my and accept that sometimes you're not going to get your way. I find it hugely frustrating, particularly on social media, particularly as see people stamping their feet in the media and stuff at the moment in various different ways. But people expect to get what they want instantly all the time. It's like, well, life's not like that. It never has been, and it probably never will be. So there is something around understanding, where your boundaries are and what's important to you.
Those two things, I'm listening to you talking about that, they kind of go hand in hand. It's really good advice, because I'm listening to it and I'm thinking, from my perspective, I don't know where I heard it. I'm sure it's a very old adage, but someone told me once that when you work for an organization, you're being paid to think, not to do. And I certainly know that I use doing as a bit of a not a defense mechanism, but I procrastinate with it, right? I get so wrapped up sometimes in the fact that I'm so busy all of the time. But like you say, maybe sometimes it's taking personal responsibility for the fact that it's not going to get less busy unless you make the decision to carve out some time for yourself to think. And
I think often we all default to task as a way of like, I'm busy, so therefore it must be, it's like, well, yeah, but what have you achieved? Apart from being busy and tired, right? When you ask employees, when they overall, we measured this for some time, on a sort of monthly, quarterly basis. Tiredness is repetitively one of the top sentiments of how people feel. And it's like, it's not because, a third of people don't sleep very well. So that's one reason why people are tired. But the other reason is they may be short of resources, they're working, they're doing extra hours, they've got home care, they've got all sorts of other stuff going on as well as their work.
Yeah.
And actually you're kind of like, where do you get the thinking time? Don't. And actually, if you don't change anything, what's going to be different? And the answer is not very much. You're just going to get more tired and more tired until you get burnt out or you can't cope anymore. And that doesn't help you or anybody else either. So constructing a kind of a world in which you can kind of build those things into your daily life, I think is important. Whether that's walking outside, walking the dog, kids, whatever it may be, you need to factor in those things rather than hope it's going to be okay.
Yeah. What's the kids are the source of tiredness? What then?
Well, I know. But then you get back to when do they go to bed, and do you have fixed routines? And,
absolutely.
And actually, what can you do to get them tired so they do go to bed and sleep? So there are lots of different coping mechanisms, but it's not easy. Our kids are grown up, so those are distant memories, but we, they didn't always sleep. They weren't always good, all of that. So life does get in the way a little bit. I understand that.
If you've got any tips to make my kids not get up at 7 a.m. on a Saturday and Sunday, that would be appreciated.
Sorry. Honestly, you get up at 6 if that's any help. That won't make me feel any better, but
So still, just final question, I guess, on that kind of advice piece. So you talked about some of the advice that you've received and whatnot. I want you to take yourself back to maybe that move from, when you first discovered wellbeing at Aviva and, in the proactive sense and whatnot. If you could go back then and give yourself a piece of advice, what do you think you'd say?
I don't know.
They do exactly the same.
I'm not sure I would do much different. I'm not a great one for. So I do plan, and I do think. Thinking is the key thing. And having worked in strategy is a kind of a clue. I've done an MBA and all those things in the past. So I like to read. I like to look at signals, track what's going on around me, and there's a really great book, if anyone's interested, called The Opposable Mind, where it encourages you to think about different things in your head at the same time. And I like that kind of that sort of mental jousting, scenarios, sort of planning type stuff. So I'm quite comfortable with that ambiguity, which I know a lot of people aren't. But there is something around. What would I say? My advice to myself is, as I've said to others, I suppose, be true to yourself, and be bold, give it a go. It's there's a lot of cliches in this. There's a lot of cliches coming out of my mouth today, but the whole thing around, we come this way but once. This isn't a dress rehearsal for life. We are in it and we're living it, and it's now, right? So, waiting for the sun to come out and something new to come along, and it'll all be better and make it all better. You need to own it. So take ownership of your own health and well-being. If you're eating crap food and not sleeping and not exercising, you are going to put on weight. You are going to get health issues, etc. You will be tired. Most people know that, and yet we're not great at kind of making sure that we kind of look after ourselves. So I guess that would be another piece of advice, is actually make sure you're looking after yourself in all of this as well.
Okay. So I'll stop grilling you about your career for a second, and I just wondered whether we could spend just 5 minutes thinking about like the state of the industry a bit more broadly. You mentioned earlier that you think things have changed hugely since the 80s. What's changed? What's
I think so. I think it's a really positive thing. So I think stigmatization of mental health, particularly, is drastically reduced. I still think we're not there. There was a survey out last week. I think a third of employees still wouldn't want to disclose to their manager they've got mental illness or mental health challenges, and I think that's sad. But it's an improvement on what used to be 50 or 60%. So I think it's heading in the right direction. More work to do. I think the use of technology to enable scaled, robust solutions is outstanding. The flip side of that is there's an awful lot of stuff which isn't maybe outstanding. So it's difficult to see the wheat from the chaff. If you're a wellbeing leader, if you look at the App Store, there's tons of stuff, most of which isn't validated, most of which isn't evidence-based, but may look nice, right? And so how do you know what will make a difference and has impact, will make a difference to your employees' personal lives and to your organizational well-being? You kind of need some help potentially, or you need to be clear on where you're going for things. I think you mentioned this earlier on, personalization is become a positive thing, and I think we'll see more of that. Because we are all different, and so we don't all want or need the same things. And so the ability to tailor, what you receive and how you get it, I think is really, really good. And I think you'll see that impact in terms of the results that are achieved over time. So I think that's good. I think the integration of different types of services, physical, mental, those type of things, along with proactive and reactive, is also great. Work in progress, but I think we'll start to see that come through, and then it becomes much easier for everyone. It is easier for people. The analogy is the mobile phone. No one thinks twice about their smartphone and the apps they've got on it, because it's the ultimate in personalization. You choose what you want on it, apart from the stuff that Apple insists that you have. And you tailor it to your personality, your lifestyle, the utilities that you want to help make your life easier, or not. And I think we'll see much more of that capability translate into the world of wellbeing, which is good.
Okay.
It's good.
And what do you think about the state of the wellbeing in the workplace industry? So I talk quite a lot about the fact that attend conferences over a decade ago, and it's wellbeing's on the cusp of something great now. It's going to change, and organizations will take it seriously. And then I heard a similar thing about 6 months ago. That's a big old cusp.
I think so. I think there's an understanding of what it is issue. Directors, leaders in the C-suite, and all the large companies, they of course they want their people to be well and perform well and do well, and of course, and we forget too often that 90% of the workforce in the UK work in small and medium-sized companies. They don't work in PLCs and 100,000 people, and they don't. They work in units of 10 or 12 or 6, and actually that's a different ball game altogether. And I think there's something around enabling small and medium-sized companies to get good advice, to understand and educate from the people that lead those businesses about actually how it might help them and their workers if they invest in whatever it is that may help them. So I think there's something around that. I think often you're competing internally within the larger organizations from a budget point of view, for attention. Right now, if you're a business that's reliant on heat or energy to run your manufacturing business, wherever it is, the well-being benefits, as they're seen, are really not very important compared to can we keep the lights on and the furnaces going, or the trucks rolling. And there is a kind of survival kind of, can we keep the business going? And then on the other end of that, you've got some very successful businesses that are thriving in the face of economic uncertainty. And again, one size doesn't fit all. Back to your thing about the well-being, I think sometimes it's picked up as a flag of convenience. The truth is, those companies have always been reliant on their people. And I think the nature of the world is more complex today. There's lots more uncertainty. The mental health challenges are coming through in spades and been growing over the last 2, 3, 5 years. But certainly since COVID, it's getting worse, and it's getting younger. So if you look at the level of anxiety and mental health challenges in schools and universities, which will translate into the workforce as they come through, that's not going to go away. It's going to get worse. Aligned to challenges around provision of treatment, the NHS being under massive pressure everywhere. You kind of, how does that get better? And layering on top of that, you kind of got the financial. So cost of living crisis, everyone's talking about that as it's the big well-being kind of thing at the moment. It is really important, but it's not the only challenge. The other stuff is there. If people aren't having their hips replaced and they're waiting 2 years, their mobility, their ability to function at work, the pain that they're in. 600,000 people have left the workforce in the last couple of years, many of which due to ill health. 1.2 million people have got long COVID. There's a whole load of other health-related issues and well-being aspects which weren't here 3 years ago. And that has an impact on, can't recruit people. You've got the hospitality sector, retail sector. It's difficult to recruit people. Same with things like drivers. There are key elements of this business. I think the UK is the third worst in terms of resource levels compared to pre-COVID levels. I think Switzerland and Estonia are the two worst. And that means that everybody else at work is under more pressure because actually there aren't enough hands on deck, and we're doing more from less people.
Yeah.
Where that's automated and designed out, that's great, but in many cases it's not. It's just people just having to suffer more and work harder, or longer, or both.
Managing those risks is well-being as well, though, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
And it's not just the workforce. This applies to the leadership team. Burnout is a thing, right? And it's a real thing. And I think we'll see more of that at senior levels as well as the middle managers. I think probably at the moment are copping the worst of it. The squeezed middle from above in terms of expectations around budget, resources, and all the way operationally you run the business, but also from below in terms of the people that who work for them, and how do you kind of square a circle? It's tough. Tough.
Got you. And I'm asking you to speculate here. But as you were talking about that, one of the things that often comes to my mind, and this is my thought, not yours. So I'm not saying you said this, but I find a lot of organizations, particularly large corporates, there's a risk that some of this becomes virtue signaling around well-being in a sense. Now, I'm sure it wasn't perfect at John Lewis, but that's an organization that seems to stand out that it's not that, in a sense. And the reason I say that is because, you have to look at something like the partnership model. Yeah. And that's something on a fundamental business level that they are doing that potentially impacts people's well-being positively. Other organizations, they might stop short of that, right? They'll say, "Oh, we'll give them yoga sessions, but we're not going to turn it into a partnership model because that would mean fundamentally changing our business." Do you see what I mean? So I don't know whether you think any of that goes on or.
Yeah, no, I think it does, and I think, and you're right. The partnership is a values-based organisation, and the intentions are good. Not always perfect, but the intentions are the right intentions, and that's a good place to start. And again, why I stayed for 10 years. Not everyone is in that same space, and I think increasingly, particularly younger members of the workforce, expect the people that they work for to care for them. They expect them to have values, not just about them, but around sustainability, the planet, the world, climate, a whole range of other things. And I think those employers that don't will find it increasingly hard to retain and attract staff. And I think that's a good thing, right? Because actually it will encourage more people to proactively make positive choices around the way they run their business, which I think is good. Certainly around the planet, we certainly need it. But certainly around health and wellbeing in the workforce as well.
Oh, got you. Okay. So that leads me to my last question, my most difficult question out of the whole one. Out of all the questions that I've asked you, or when you logged on today, was there one question that you wish I had asked you? And if so, what is it and how might you have answered? That's a big one to think of on the spot.
I guess the obvious one is, how do I maintain my own sense of perspective and well-being? Because I get asked that a lot. Well, what do you do? Because it's all about talking. There's a risk in this space of well-being leadership that you end up broadcasting and pontificating, and when actually we've all got our own view of what's important to us and what we need. So, as I said earlier on, for me the importance is to understand yourself and what's important, but then translate that into the way that you live your life. I do that a number of different ways. So one, so I don't work full-time on work anymore. I've got buckets of things. So I've got work, paid work. I've got some voluntary stuff that I do. And I've got some hobbies or interests that I'm turning into probably work. So I'm painting quite a bit now. And so I'm just in the process of setting up an online sales art shop, which is good. Yeah. So turning a hobby into kind of hopefully a small, modest income stream. But I like to go and watch live sport, particularly rugby. So I watch with a couple of friends. I go to my old rugby club as well. So that involves, I have to be careful that it doesn't involve, we don't get too social, but that's good. But every day I'll try and walk for half an hour. This weather's, that's a bit of a test, but and it's just making sure you've got some balance in your life. Try and take holidays, get to the sea or get away out into the environment out of this desk, away from Zoom. Spend time with.
Well, you're on a Zoom call.
It's a balance, right? Yeah, no, but it's a balance.
Yeah.
And I've spent, like a lot of us have 10, 12 hours a day on calls, then without, with or without breaks. It's making sure that actually you protect the important things, so your relationships, your time outside, having some fun, because again, life is to be enjoyed. That's tough at the minute. I understand that a lot of people find it very, very tough, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that actually we are here to kind of have some fun with people that we like being around. So
absolutely. Cool. Good place to finish up. So I've got one final question, which is, where can people find you? What's next, and where can people find you? And is there anything you'd like to plug to our audience as well?
No, well,
so the painting.
Physically, you can find me in Bath. I live in Bath in the West Country, which, if you're on a weekend away, is a beautiful place to visit. Mm-hmm. It's built on sort of Roman remains and all that stuff. So it's a beautiful part of the world. From a work point of view, you can find me on LinkedIn. Or you can find me at nickdavison.art, which is my latest thing. But yeah, no, by all means, if you want some help, any advice, by all means, shout. I'm always happy to. I'm never short of an opinion. It's up to you what you make of it. But yeah, it's been good. So
appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us and to our listeners. It's been great.
Thank you, Matt.
Hopefully get you on a future podcast as well.
Look forward to it. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.